This is Ron Kessler for Newsmax TV, and we're very honored to have three stars of the House with us. Representative Paul Ryan, Representative Eric Cantor, and Representative Kevin McCarthy. Congratulations on your new book.
Thanks.
Young Guns. I understand it's doing very well already. What is the idea behind the book?
Well, first of all, the idea is basically to acknowledge that when Republicans ran the majority before, we deviated from our conservative principles. We lost our way. We need to own up for that. And what we're basically trying to say is there's a new generation of conservative leaders, not only in the Republican Party here in Washington, but what we're doing with Young Guns is trying to go around the country and recruit men and women to come to Congress to help reclaim these conservative principles that built this country. A hopeful, optimistic, conservative message. We want people not coming to Washington to advance a political career. We want people to come to Washington to advance a cause, and the cause is getting this country back to its founding principles and prevent this runaway government that we have on display right now.
Earmarks is a big part of that, even though the total spending on earmarks isn't that great. They tend to sort of corrupt members. Members will, vote for bigger spending bills in return for an earmark. So what is your ideal position on what to do about that?
Really, the three of us began several years ago to try and work on a plan to see how we can change the culture in Washington. And we felt like we needed more folks to come here to work alongside of us here in Congress to actually begin to fix Washington so that it would work for the people that pay for it. Earmarks is a symptom of a culture that needs to be changed. And that's really what we're going to be about if we're lucky enough to retake this majority, and to make sure that we set the country on a path to limit the scope of the federal government, which means to cut federal spending, work our way towards a balanced budget, and to make sure that people see a Congress that works for them. And that's really why we began this effort, because listen, we've seen the mistakes that we've made in the past when we were in a majority, and frankly, we've seen a huge commission of error on the part of the other side, obviously with probably the most liberal agenda that we've seen in this country in generations. And that's why we are witnessing now probably one of the biggest uprisings grassroots-wise across the country, saying that people are looking at the fact they want their government back, they want their country back.
And I mean, part of what Paul was saying before, we have to earn our way back. We realized Republicans were fired in 2006, and rightfully so. What did Republicans do this year? Stimulus came up. Every Republican voted no because they know it was failed. It's a Keynesian type view. We designed a plan that focused on private sector. But we took a conference approach where we took a moratorium on earmarks. We've already started the reform. And that's a way to showing the American public that we're here to earn their trust back, and we will not forget how we got there.
And speaking of being lucky enough to get back in power, I understand some Republican members are predicting a pickup of 50 to 60 seats. What do you think the prospects are?
Well, first of all, we can't measure the drapes. We should not count the chickens before they hatch. I could use more metaphors, but we've got to get through this election, and we've got to go to the American people and give them a very clear choice. Do you want to restore those founding principles that made this the most exceptional nation in the country, or do you want to go down this path of creating a welfare state that this current progressive government's doing? We got to win that debate, and the Democrats are going to throw us a lot of money and a lot of muscle in the next, 45, 46 days. So we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. We've got to get through this election. So I'm not one of these people. This is the guy you probably should ask the question about numbers. He knows this stuff a whole lot better than I do.
And he's not talking.
But it's difficult to say how many seats we're going to pick up. But what we're doing, we're up to 75 young gun candidates. So we started with just 40, and then we've expanded Young Guns to 75 men and women out there in Congress, conservatives running to come back here. We've expanded the playing field because the playing field has expanded so much. He can answer the question better than I can.
To be a Young Gun candidate, you're challenging a Democrat. And when you look, since 1920, there's been 45 races for Congress. And only 6 times out of those 45 times did Republicans even out-recruit the Democrats. And they only did it twice in the minority, during 92 and 94. This year, not only did we out-recruit the Democrats, there are more Republicans running than ever in the history of the Republican Party. In 1994, that a lot of Republicans looked to, we had 421 candidates. Today we have 430. So when you believe in the free market, when you believe in the free market of ideas, this is the best opportunity. When more candidates rise up, the quality of the candidate rises even further. And the recruitment class this year comes from a different walk. It's not a legislator or others. These are individuals who have been successful in their own private sector, not running because they're promising a bridge in the district, but running because they care about where this country is going, and they can't tell their children they did nothing when they watch it happening.
John Boehner, the Republican leader, made the statement that he could live with not extending the Bush tax cuts to the upper tier, and then he sort of backtracked on that. But I understand he's put out the word among his circle that he didn't know what he was doing when he said that he just felt comfortable saying it because he believes they will be extended regardless, because enough Democrats are for extending them across the board.
John Boehner is a small business person. He is a person that came to Washington for the right reasons. He understands that a tax burden on a small business right now and increasing that burden is not what we ought to be doing in a recession. It is the Republican position. In fact, it is a bipartisan position in the House.
And even his position.
And his position,
Now.
a bipartisan position that says we ought not have tax hikes for anybody right now. And what we're seeing is now groups of Democrats writing to their speaker, insisting that she bring to the floor a bill that allows the staving off of these tax hikes. And that's what we're going to fight for. We're going to use every tool we've got to insist that that happens. Because one of what we're hearing, and I know a lot of people are realizing, is there is so much uncertainty surrounding the economy, and investors, small business people, working moms, everyone are wondering, how do I know what my tax rates are going to be? How do I know what the regulatory environment is going to be? That is adding to the frustration on the part of the people when they look to see whether their government's working for them. And I think the answer is clearly no.
I'd also take issue with the idea that these are tax cuts.
It's only tax
These aren't
increase.
tax cuts. These are the tax rates we have in place today that we've had in place for 7 years. What we're talking about is preventing tax increases from happening. The White House would like you to think that we're deciding whether to cut people's taxes or not. No, we're deciding whether or not to raise taxes or not. And we don't want to raise taxes. We know we have the votes to prevent that from happening. The question is, will the president and will Speaker Pelosi allow that vote to occur so these tax increases are prevented? And we just don't know the answer to that question.
There's obviously been a lot of, or at least some friction between the Tea Party and the established leaders of the party. How widespread is that friction, in your opinion?
It's not widespread with young guns. Young guns believe that nobody in Washington has power. The power rests with the people. They loan it to the individuals, and they go back every 2 years to see if they loan it again. And that's why the young guns not only battles, but it battles with the power of the idea. That the idea should win, and solutions should be created.
And look, what we've seen across the country in the primaries, the latest one being in Delaware, is a reflection of the ire and the anger that the people have towards Washington. They're tired of the spending. They're tired of the insistence that Washington should keep growing and trying to control more of our lives. And frankly, they're tired of politicians making promises that they can't keep. And it is sort of it really is a statement. It's not just Tea Partiers, it is independents, it's Republicans and Democrats alike that want to see accountability instilled back into this system. So I know all of us look to the Tea Parties as individuals who represent the type of fiscal discipline that we ought to be aiming for here in Washington.
Even 40% of Democrats said spending should be decreased now. What about, let's say you guys take over, obviously you will, what would be the priorities in terms of?
Stop the spending spree, number one, and work to get this economy growing again, not through growing government jobs, but growing private sector jobs.
And we've put proposals on the table throughout the past 20 months that assist small business. I mean, that is the job generator. If you look at where jobs are created, over 2/3 are created by small businesses. In fact, even more proportionately are started by startup businesses. Right now, the startup business, if you will, is dead because you do not have investors, people who are willing to commit venture capital to grow a new entity. because of all the uncertainty. We've got to go back in this country to the free market orientation that allows investors to come here, that attracts capital. Frankly, we have to be the magnet for investment-based capital again. And if we don't seize this opportunity to do so, I'm afraid we're going to really see a decline in this country, and a decline in the standard of living. And maybe it'll be that our kids won't have the opportunity to pursue their dreams and ideas here at home.
And how about the health care bill or health care legislation?
Well, we're going to repeal it. And we can go in and replace it with allowing free market ideas, changing tort reform, the highest cost of health care where it's rising, everybody's premiums is rising. You look at from selling insurance across state lines, you can do with car insurance, why can't you do with health insurance? Taking care of pre-existing conditions and protecting that patient-doctor relationship. But you've got a looming tax, you've got this uncertainty out there from healthcare to cap and trade. You've got to end the uncertainty so capital will come back to the markets and jobs will be created.
I mean, obviously, to repeal and fully replace it completely, you need a new president. And so what's going to happen after this election, providing we get the majority and we can start setting the stage for this, is we're going to have to ask Americans to make a choice in this country. What kind of government do they want? Do they want one that reconnects itself to those founding principles, liberty, freedom, free enterprise, self-determination, government by consent of the governed? Or are we done with that? And are we going the direction that the current administration, the current Congress wants to go, which is to create sort of a European cradle-to-grave welfare state? That's the choice that's confronting this country. That's where the fiscal situation is taking us. We have a strong opinion on which one we should have. Get back to those founding principles. And all of these things we're talking about revolve around that critical choice that Americans are going to have to make in not only the 2010 election, but also this 2012 election.
And to follow up on that point, our role, if we're able to reclaim the majority here, our role is going to be to put these type of principles upon which we believe America has been successful into action. And that is orient towards free market. Make sure that we've got individual accountability in place. And part of that is going to mean, if we're operating, obviously, with a Democratic-controlled White House, is to shine the light on some of these regulations that they're pursuing and how detrimental they are to job growth and innovation. And we're going to have to go and lay out the argument as to why we need a change in the White House so we can manage a repeal and a replacement of the health care bill that passed.
Yeah, and speaking of regulations, I think they'll start trying to change things with regulations, even if they don't have control.
Well, we have
of Congress.
legislation right now. You look at the cap and trade, passed the House, didn't pass the Senate. So here you go, you have an agency trying to inflict it upon the rest of the country. We have legislation out that says, no, any major piece of regulation needs to pass the House. That the people voted on individuals, they should vote on the bill itself. That would be a fundamental change we can prove.
And last question, the hardest one, I guess, is what do you think makes Obama tick? He
Redistribution.
I wrote a column saying he has many talents, but being president is not one of them.
I see him as an ideological person. I believe he thinks that the role and goal of government is not what we would traditionally call the American idea, where we protect our natural rights and promote equal opportunity. I think he has an ideology, more of a progressive type of ideology, where he believes the role and goal of government is to equalize the results of our lives. He doesn't believe in equal opportunity, he believes more in equal outcome, and the government is the agency, the government is the force that should equalize our results. It's fundamentally different than the American idea, and I think that's where he falls down on it.
What I do know about his background, it is not one that has reflected an individual who's experienced small business, that has built and run an ongoing concern. And when you don't have an individual that is responsible like that, and in fact he will, in some of his speeches, talk about his days as a community organizer and helping people. And basically helping people in that context is alleging wrongdoings by others imposed upon the people he's trying to help, and trying to basically even out the system in terms of outcomes, as Paul says. So I'm concerned about the lack of business experience, the lack of belief that if you work hard, you invest, you put capital at risk, and you play by the rules, you should be successful. I don't necessarily think that that's in his background, and I think it's reflected in his policies that maybe we shouldn't trust the free markets, and that what we should be doing is trying to correct a situation where some type of social injustice has been imposed upon others. That's just not the optimistic American way, and that's what we want to see change here if we're able to take the majority.
Look, the one thing you see is we're all creatures of our environment, our experiences. He's been a community organizer, he's been a trial lawyer, he's worked very closely with the labor union. There's one thread that goes across all of them: redistributors of wealth, not wealth creation. And that's what he fights for. But he doesn't realize when he redistributes the wealth, he's punishing wealth creation. And if you want less of something, you punish it. And that's what's happening in America today and the challenge that we face. That's what the book about young guns is all about. Finding candidates that have been in the private sector that understand wealth creation, understand ideas, but more importantly, understands how to solve problems. And we ask them to go out into the marketplace of elections, let the best idea go forward, and solve the problems that America faces in this 21st century.
Thank you very much. And by the way, spending 20 years listening to Reverend Wright didn't help either. This is Ron Kessler from Newsmax TV, and we appreciate your time and insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.